Brandon Gonzalez, a 22-year-old living in Goragayan West, a growing suburb in Mumbai City, shared his home with his mother, Seema, and older sister, Kakma. On the morning of December 19, 2016, as was his routine, Gonzalez left for a walk from his home to Ari Colony. Typically, he would return within an hour, but on this day he didn't come back until afternoon. Worried, Seema and Kakma tried contacting his friends, as Gonzalez had left his phone at home. Despite their efforts, no one had any information about him. As night fell, concern grew, prompting Seema and Kakma to visit the nearby Dindosi police station to file a missing person report. The police joined Gonzalez's family and friends in their search, distributing his photo to nearby stations. Then, on December 22nd, around 12:30 p.m., a call was received at the nearby Ari police station. The caller reported discovering a headless body. Police immediately rushed to the scene in Ari Colony, where the sight they encountered left them shocked. There, beneath a tree, lies a body without a head, neck, or clothes, and upon seeing it, it seemed as if someone had placed it there deliberately. Now witnessing this sight, the police cordoned off the area completely, not allowing any ordinary person to approach. Afterwards, the police began their investigation by first examining the area nearby. Just 20 meters away from the body, the police found the head and clothes stained with blood. Additionally, a few meters away from the body, the police also found some other items used in worship such as a mirror, coconut, padukas, threads, turmeric powder, and kumkum powder aka vermilion. Anyway, the police collected these items and sent the body to a nearby hospital for post-mortem. Subsequently, the files of missing persons were checked at the Ari police station, and the identification of this dead body was made with a boy named Brandon Goncalves. As I mentioned earlier, the missing report of Brandon Goncalves had been distributed to all nearby police stations by Dindosi police. So now the Ari police confirmed that he was the same boy who had gone missing 3 days ago on December 19th. Well, now Gonzalez's family is also informed, and thus the missing case of Gonzalez turns into a murder case. After this, as far as I have read, perhaps the police had to form 8+ teams to search for Gonzalez's killer, including a special team from the crime branch. But seeing the body of her only son in this condition, Gonzalez's mother, Seema, and elder sister, Kakma, were both in a terrible state of distress. So much so that when Seema saw her son in this condition, she fainted upon seeing the body. However, the police quickly began their investigation to find the culprits. On the other hand, some shocking details emerged in Gonzalez's post-mortem report. The post-mortem report stated that Gonzalez's tongue, voice box, skin from his right cheek, and even his entire neck were missing with the neck bone intact. This means that someone had killed Gonzalez so brutally that even the small spine is fragment of our neck, the neck spine, was broken. All these things were horrifying the police because initially, the police thought this case seemed to be a result of personal rivalry, as if someone had killed Gonzalez to settle a score, but the police were soon to be proven wrong. Actually, according to the post-mortem report, it was found that Gonzalez's death occurred due to the separation of his head from his body. However, forensic pathologists also checked whether Gonzalez was given any drugs or substances before being killed, but nothing like that was found in any post-mortem report. After that, the police found out that Gonzalez was murdered 3 days before his body was found between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. on the same day he went missing. Additionally, there were no signs of any fight, struggle, or injury on his body, indicating that Gonzalez didn't even try to save himself until his last breath. Furthermore, 2 marks were found on Gonzalez's body. Actually, there were 2 cross symbols on his forehead and right hand, which seemed to have been made with a sharp object. After learning about all these things, this case became even more intriguing for the police and investigators because now there were a lot more questions in front of the police. Looking at Gonzalez's body, it seemed as if his body had been cut twice. First, his head was separated from his shoulders, and then later his neck was cut from the head. Additionally, forensic experts said that where Gonzalez's body was found, there was absolutely no evidence of his murder if there's not a single trace of blood was found there. So it was clear that Goncalves was killed somewhere else, and then some parts of his body were removed to perform some rituals or something similar. Later, his body and clothes were thrown away in this deserted place. Here, when the police found the materials of worship in glass, coconuts, slippers, turmeric, and vermilion at the crime scene, for the first time, this case seems like a human sacrifice. After the possibility arose that Goncalves might be taken to another location and harmed, the police began checking the CCTV cameras around the Ari colony. But first, they checked the CCTV cameras around his house. They saw Gonsalve leaving with his dog around 7 o'clock in the morning and returning after a morning walk within an hour. O'clock in the morning and returning after a morning walk within an hour. However, just 10 minutes later, Gonsalve left his house again, but this time with a bag. Now what was in that bag could not be determined because the bag itself was not found. But then a little further from Gonsalves' house, the police spotted a white Audi car in another CCTV footage with two people inside, a driver and a woman in a white Punjabi suit. It was shown in the CCTV that they were following Gonsalves slowly with their car. The woman wearing a white Punjabi suit is given directions to the driver, telling him to take the car in that direction. However, the police also questioned Gonsalves' family members to see if anyone might know that woman and driver. But the police didn't get any good response from there either. The police suspected that there might be more than two people in the car. And unfortunately, the day Gonsalves' body was found, the two CCTV cameras in that area were not working. This raised suspicion for the police that Gonsalves was abducted on December 19th in this same car, and then murdered elsewhere with his body being thrown in a deserted place in Ari colony on the dark night or morning of December 22nd. But since then, investigators have felt that perhaps a local person might be involved in this murder case because the police chucked 70-plus CCTV cameras in this entire case. But none of them recorded anything suspicious that would raise suspicion on any individual. The investigators clarified that perhaps the killers were aware of the location of every CCTV camera in the air colony. This helped them in escaping from the colony and Gora game. This clears one thing, that the killer was someone who was well acquainted with Gora game and the colony because an outsider couldn't have known every road in CCTV so well. The investigators explored all possible angles of Gonsalves' killing, such as a love affair angle, whether someone jealous killed Gonsalves, and a personal rivalry, human sacrifice angle, robbery, and property dispute. But the police never found any leads in any angle. Although for some time, the police kept the angle of human sacrifice on the table and even questioned several tantrics, babas, and black magicians about the cut parts of the body, the mark of the cross on the forehead and the right hand, whether there was any connection between them or not. But the police didn't get any help from here either. Gonsalves was a middle-class boy who decided to graduate in arts. However, due to some reasons, he dropped out of college as well. His father had passed away 3 years ago, leaving Gonsalves in a state of depression for a long time. During the police investigation, Gonsalves' call records were also checked, but no suspicious numbers were found. In fact, Gonsalves rarely talked to anyone except for his family or perhaps 3 or 4 friends. But what intrigued the police in this case was finding a diary in Gonsalves' room. Within it were some sketches that further complicated this case. Actually, if these sketches are examined closely, it will be apparent that they tell the story of 2 sacrifices. In the first, a person is attempting to cut off an animal's head while wearing a suit. Meanwhile, in the second sacrifice, a man's head is being cut off with a saw. In addition to these, an attempt has been made to portray the SpongeBob cartoon character as a monster. On the other side of the page, a cartoon character as a monster. On the other side of the page, a picture of a deer without a head has been drawn, and right next to it, only the head of a lion cub has been drawn. Furthermore, when the police went inside Gonsalves' house, they found a strange sign on a wall just behind the door, as if it were some sort of cult symbol. Now what was even more surprising was that when the Mumbai police tried to recreate the crime scene with Gonsalves' dog, the startling thing was that Gonsalves' dog went straight to where Gonsalves' body was lying with a tree. After a while, his dog arrived at the spot where Gonsalves' body was found, just a few meters away. Among all the cases we've explained on this channel so far, this case was the weirdest. Like how Gonsalves' dog somehow went to the places where his body was found. It's possible that when Gonsalves first went out for a walk with his dog on December 19th, he might have already gone to the place where his body was found. Another point is that the white Audi car following Gonzalez might have been known to him, and he might have gone with them willingly, sitting in the car. Additionally, it's possible that after returning home, Gonzalez took the bag with him, which might have contained items related to worship like coconut, paducas, etc., because it's also being said on the internet that maybe Gonzalez sacrificed himself. Today, it's been over 7 years since this case, but the murderer of Brandon Gonzalez is still unknown. Meanwhile, Gonzalez's mother and sister have made numerous visits to the police station and the crime branch office to find out the status of their son, Brandon Gonzalez's murder case. During this time, Gonzalez's mother and sister were afraid that the police might close Gonzalez's murder case. Due to this reason, Seema's elder daughter, with this Brandon Gonzalez case, also concludes here. Before moving forward, quickly subscribe to the channel. This is strange. You haven't subscribed to the channel yet. Quickly subscribe to it. Now we are jumped to the next story. This is the story of Madanapalli city in the state of Andhra Pradesh, India, which is Asia's largest tomato market. Besides, there are many mountains here as well. It was January 24th, 2021 around 8:30 p.m. on Sunday night in Madanapalli when Dr. V. Purushotham Naidu, the head of the Naidu family, called his friend Raju and said on the phone, "Both my daughters are no longer in this world. Aleka, 27, and Sedivya, 22, have both passed away, but there's nothing to worry about. Tomorrow morning, they will come back through reincarnation because the Kalayug is ending, and the Satyug will begin from tomorrow." Upon hearing this, Raju said to his friend Dr. Naidu, "Everything is normal at home. Speaking such language against your daughters doesn't suit you." In response, Dr. Naidu said, "No, Raju, I am telling the truth. In a while, both I and your sister-in-law will leave our bodies in Kalyug and be born again in Satyug." Upon hearing this, Dr. Naidu's friend Raju started feeling extremely restless. Consequently, he abruptly ended the call and within a few minutes arrived at Dr. Naidu's house. Raju reached there, knocked on the door, and just as the door was about to open, Dr. Naidu himself appeared, looking completely normal. But when Raju went inside and saw the scene there, his eyes widened in shock because Dr. Naidu had spoken the truth. Lying on the ground in the prayer room of his house was the lifeless body of his 27-year-old daughter, Alakija. She had completed her master's in Bhopal and now was preparing for the civil services. Her face was pale, and blood was oozing from various places. After this, Dr. Naidu took Raju to another room adjacent to the prayer room where the dead body of his 22-year-old daughter, Sedivya, lay on the ground. She had been struck with a trident of Lord Shiva on her forehead, and a small brass pot placed in the prayer room was inserted into her mouth. The clothes were removed from both bodies, and they were wrapped in red cloth. Additionally, their hair was partially cut, and they were placed in front of the statue of Lord Shiva in the temple. They had scattered many worship materials around the bodies. However, despite seeing the bodies of their daughters, there was no sign of tension or sorrow on the faces of Dr. Naidu and his wife, Padmaja. This behavior of his friend and his wife seemed very strange to Raju. Therefore, he bids them goodbye and leaves their house. However, instead of going home, he goes straight to the police station and tells the police the whole story of how these educated parents sacrificed their daughters. He also informs them about the mental condition of Dr. Naidu and his wife. However, the police didn't having little belief in Raju's story after hearing this strange tale, because for the past year, Dr. Naidu and his family, who had been living in the new house in Madanapalli, had earned quite a reputation in the city. Anyway, after that, the police station in charge, along with some officers, directly reached the Naidu family's house. When the police knocked on the door, once again it was Dr. Naidu who opened it. But seeing her husband's friend with him, Padmaja got very angry and started shouting at the police because they had once again disrupted their worship. Now the argument between the police and the Naidu family had attracted neighbors from nearby. Now as soon as the police entered the house and saw what was inside, they too were astonished. Later, after hearing Raju, the police realized that it was a case of superstition. Although Mr. and Mrs. Naidu repeatedly tried to convince the police that both their daughters would return to life before sunrise tomorrow, they were just saying that they only need a day's time, and tomorrow morning both our daughters will come back to life. then you all will be surprised. But the police knew that both girls were dead. So how could they come back to life? Therefore, Mr. and Mrs. Naidu were first explained with great difficulty. But when they still didn't understand, the police showed some firmness and took both of them to the police station. Afterwards, a forensic team was called in to investigate the crime scene. The forensic team continued their examination for some time and then sent the bodies for post-mortem. Now the police have started investigating both inside and outside the house. Here, the police learned from neighbors of the Naidu family that someone from the family used to go out daily to buy something. But for the past 3 days, no one has come out of the house nor has anyone gone inside. Not even the maid who used to clean the house, as these people did not even call her. After that, the police directly approached the maid who told them that 3 days ago she was told by the Naidus that we are going to perform a special worship in the house for 3 days, and until we call you, do not come to work at the house. On the other hand, upon checking both girls' social media profiles and bookshelves inside the house, the police found out that Alkia highly respects Indian philosopher Osho. On his social Alikia's dead body was a book by the spiritual guru, Meher Baba. Besides, pictures of Shri Sai Baba, Meher Baba and Osho were plastered all over their house. Furthermore, neighbors often heard prayers and tantric chants from their house, and several times they saw some swamis entering the house. On the other hand, what was surprising was that just a few days before the murder, Alkia posted twice on her Instagram. In one post, she wrote, "Work is done." And in the second post, "Shiva is coming." Well, only Dr. Naidu and Padmaja, who were present in the custody, could reveal the truth behind this. However, controlling Padmaja was proving to be extremely difficult for the police. But before the custody, when the police were taking both husband and wife for a COVID test, Padmaja started saying, "I am Shiva myself. Because of my body particles, COVID has spread everywhere. It did not come from China." After getting their COVID tests done, Dr. Naidu informed the police about his background. Actually, Dr. Naidu had a master's in philosophy and science. In addition, he had obtained a PhD and was currently a professor of chemistry at Government Degree College for Women, Nadanapalli. His wife, Padmaja, was a gold medalist in mathematics and had been teaching at the famous schools of Madanapal for nearly 23 years, including at Mastermind's IIT Talent High School. Alongside, she also had a master's in science. Additionally, Aleksh, 27, was a postgraduate from Phopal and then an aspirant for civil services. Furthermore, Saidivya, a 22-year-old, was training at the A.R. Rama Music Conservatory in Mumbai after completing her Bachelor of Business Administration course. However, due to the lockdown, both of them had to return home. You might also wonder why, with such educated family members, these individuals attempted suicide. You'll find the answer by the end of the video. Afterwards, Alikia picked up Lord Shiva's trident from the temple and thrust it into her sister Divya's forehead. Then a copper vessel was placed in her mouth. Following the death of her younger sister Divya, Alikia told her mother that now she had to kill her. As a result, Padmarja struck Alikia on the head with a dumbbell kept in the house. Consequently, Alakia also died shortly thereafter. After killing both their daughters, both the husband and wife wandered around their bodies for quite some time. Now, because of the insistence of the wife and daughter, it was Dr. Nayudo's turn. Perhaps out of fear, he called his friend and told him the whole matter. And if he hadn't made that call, perhaps neither of them would be in this world today. However, due to this, Padmajaja scolded her husband Dr. Nayudu a lot, saying, "You are a coward. Because of you, our secret got out and our daughters couldn't come back." After seeing all this, it was finalized in this case that due to mental illness, all these family members had planned this. And it was revealed from a psychiatrist source that their entire was dealing with a rare disorder called shared psychotic disorder. Actually, in this disorder, more than two people who are in close relationships have a similar way of thinking. And it's because of this disorder that Alikia and Saidivya are no longer in this world today. In this double murder case, Alikia had a Canadian friend who told the print media that he couldn't believe for many days that Alikia could do such a thing. After questioning on Monday evening, funeral of both these girls were performed, and permission for this was given only to Dr. Nayudu, while the girl's mother, Padmaja, was not allowed to participate for some reasons. In my opinion, in this case, Sedivya and Dr. Purushottam Naidu seem innocent to me, although if they hadn't fallen into the temptation of Alekya and Padmaja, perhaps this would have been a happy family today. So with this, the case comes to an end here. Friends, how did you like this combined cases? In December 1987, as families gathered to celebrate peace and joy in the small town of Dover, Arkansas, a sinister shadow disrupted the season's cheer. For one family, the holidays turned into a nightmare of unimaginable horror. This is the chilling story of Ronald Gene Simmons, the so-called Christmas killer who transformed a season of love into one of tragedy. What drives a person to destroy what they once held dear? What darkness within the human psyche turns a father into a predator? From a decorated war hero to the perpetrator of one of the deadliest family massacres in American history, Simmons' story reveals a mind consumed by secrets and rage, where the line between protector and predator blurred fatally. To understand the depths of this tragedy, we must trace Ronald Gene Simmons' life back to its beginnings, long before violence defined his legacy. Born on July 15, 1940, in Chicago, Illinois, Ronald Gene Simmons' early life seemed unremarkable. His father passed away from a stroke when Simmons was just 3 years old. Less than a year later, his mother remarried a civil engineer with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, prompting the family to move to Arkansas. Little is known about Simmons' early years, but his life took a disciplined turn when he dropped out of school and joined the United States Navy in 1957, later transferring to the U.S. Air Force. Simmons served his country with distinction during a 22-year military career, earning multiple honors, including the Bronze Star Medal, the Republic of Vietnam Gallantry Cross, and the Air Force Ribbon for excellent marksmanship. Yet, beneath this seemingly honorable exterior lay the seeds of a far darker future. But behind the facade of a decorated military man, there were undercurrents of turmoil. Simmons married Rebecca Ulibri in 1960 in New Mexico, and together, they had 7 children. However, the veneer of a normal family life was shattered in 1981 when allegations emerged that Simmons had been assaulting his 15-year-old daughter, Sheila, and had fathered a child with her. Fearing prosecution, Simmons uprooted his family, moving them from New Mexico to a desolate 13-acre tract of land in Pope County, 6.5 miles north of Dover, Arkansas, known as Mockingbird Hill. This property, isolated and ringed with a makeshift fence up to 10 feet tall, became a fortress of sorts, a place where Simmons could exert total control. The residents didn't have a phone or indoor plumbing. But what was it that drove a man of discipline and service to the edge of such darkness? Was it the fear of losing control over his family? The desperation to conceal his illicit acts? Or something deeper, a more sinister aspect of his psyche yet to be revealed? The facade of the family man began to crumble, revealing a tyrannical figure ruling his household with an iron fist. The family, once a symbol of joy and unity, became prisoners in their own home. This descent into tyranny was but a prelude to the horror that would unfold, unraveling the chilling transformation of Ronald Gene Simmons from a respected military man to one of the most notorious mass murderers in American history. In November 1979, Simmons retired from the Air Force and military service. He did some low-paying jobs in the nearby town of Russellville, Arkansas. He worked as an accounts receivable clerk at Woodline Motor Freight, but had to resign after multiple reports of inappropriate sexual advances. He worked for about a year and a half at a Sinclair Mini Mart, but had to quit on December 18, 1987 because of low wages. 2 of the elder children, Billy and Sheila, had moved out, got married, and started their own families. So by the time of the murders, there were only 7 people living in the house. The calm of the holiday season in 1987 was shattered in Dover, Arkansas by a series of heinous crimes. Ronald Gene Simmons' descent into murderous madness began shortly before Christmas on December 22nd. The Simmons family home, once a haven of domestic life, turned into a chilling stage for an unthinkable act. Ronald Gene Simmons, armed with a .22 caliber pistol, commenced a killing spree that would become the worst family massacre in American history. His first victims were his wife, 46-year-old Rebecca, and eldest son, 26-year-old Ronald Jr., bludgeoned with a crowbar and shot. and he strangled Ronald Jr.'s daughter and his granddaughter, 3-year-old Barbara. Their demise was just the beginning. Simmons lay in wait for his other children, feigning a festive spirit, only to mercilessly end their lives, one by one. Later that day, the Dover school bus dropped off the younger kids for their Christmas break from school. In a macabre ritual, Simmons systematically strangled and drowned his younger children, displaying a level of brutality that defies comprehension. The youngest victims, mere toddlers, met a similar fate, their innocence stolen in the most atrocious way. Simmons told them he had gifts for each of them, which he wanted to give one at a time, then strangled them and held under the water in a rain barrel. First to receive her gift was his eldest daughter, 17-year-old Loretta. His 3 other children, 14-year-old Eddie, 11-year-old Mary, and 8-year-old Becky were murdered in the same brutal manner. He then dumped the bodies in one of the cesspits he had made his children dig days before. But the horror did not end there. On December 26th, as the rest of the world celebrated, Simmons' remaining family members arrived for a holiday dated, unaware of the nightmare that awaited them. 23-year-old Simmons' son Billy, his 21-year-old daughter-in-law Renata, and their child were the next to fall victim to his unfathomable rage. Billy and Renata were both shot dead. Their bodies were left by the dining room table next to the decorated Christmas tree with unopened gifts and covered with their own coats and some bedding. Then their 20-month-old son, Trey, was strangled and drowned. The same fate befell his 24-year-old daughter, Sheila, her 33-year-old husband, Dennis, and their children. Simmons strangled his and Sheila's child, 6-year-old Sylvia, and finally, his 21-month-old grandson, Michael. The bodies were meticulously laid out, a grim tableau that defied any sense of humanity. He then covered their bodies with coats. Sheila's body was laid on the dining room table and covered with Rebecca Simmons' best tablecloth. He wrapped the bodies of Trey and Michael in plastic sheeting, and they were left in abandoned cars behind the Simmons home. Simmons then embarked on a chillingly ordinary series of errands, his actions a stark contrast to the carnage he had just inflicted. He drove to a Sears store in Russellville to pick up Christmas gifts previously ordered for his family. That night, he went out for a drink at a local bar. When he returned home, he spent the night and the next day drinking beer and watching television surrounded by the dead bodies of his family. On December 28th, the killing spree spilled over into the town of Russellville. In the morning, Simmons drove a car that had belonged to his son, Ronald Jr., to a Walmart in Russellville and purchased a second firearm. Fueled by a mix of revenge and rage, Simmons targeted those he felt had wronged him. The violence was indiscriminate, claiming the lives of acquaintances and strangers alike. His former workplace, a law firm, became the stage for his continued rampage. 24-year-old Kathy Kendrick, a secretary who had rebuffed his advances, was his first victim. She was fatally shot. The brutality continued at the Taylor Oil Company, where he shot and wounded the 38-year-old owner, Russell Taylor, who was also the owner of Sinclair Mini Mark, from which Simmons had recently resigned. He also killed a complete stranger in the building and shot at another employee before exiting the building, but missed. In Sinclair Mini Mart, Simmons shot and wounded 2 more people. He then shot his former supervisor, 35-year-old Joyce Butts, twice and wounded her in the office of Woodline Motor Freight. She survived and testified later that Simmons had yelled at her during a previous argument about wages. The entire rampage lasted 45 minutes. 2 people were killed and 4 wounded. Simmons' final act was as perplexing as it was chilly. He said to the secretary in Woodline Motor Freight, "I just wanted to kill Joyce. Just Joyce. I've gotten everybody who wanted to hurt me." Simmons surrendered to police without resistance, his spree of violence concluding as abruptly as it had begun. But the most heinous of his crimes were yet to be discovered. Simmons sat silently in his cell and stared at the wall. He refused to speak to investigators or even his attorneys. He didn't say a word during the interrogation. But when he was asked about his family, Simmons' eyes got red and started to well up. His lips started to quiver. The police got suspicious. They couldn't reach his family, so 2 officers drove to the isolated home. The investigation began on the chilling grounds of the Simmons family home. Here, detectives encountered a scene that defied belief. Family members' bodies laid out with a chilling meticulousness. It was a tableau that spoke volumes about the mindset of the killer. In the aftermath of this unprecedented massacre, questions swirled. What drove a father, a husband, a war veteran to commit such unspeakable acts against his own family and community? And what can we learn from this tragedy to prevent such horrors in the future? In the wake of the horrific murders committed by Ronald Gene Simmons, law enforcement faced the daunting task of piecing together a puzzle that spanned both family tragedy and public rampage. As the probe widened to include Simmons' subsequent attacks in Russellville, the challenge for investigators was to understand the connection between the family murders and the seemingly random acts of violence that followed. The evidence gathered was overwhelming. Firearms, witness testimonies, and Simmons' own actions painted a picture of a man who, after committing an unspeakable act against his own family, sought to extend his vengeance to those he perceived had wronged him in the wider community. In a case that stunned even seasoned investigators, the question wasn't just who had committed these crimes, but why. What drives a man to annihilate his family and lash out at the world around him? The arrest of Ronald Gene Simmons brought an end to the immediate threat, but it was just the beginning of a quest for justice and understanding. The prosecution's task was to unravel the mind of Simmons, to present a narrative that could make sense of the senseless. As the investigation progressed, more disturbing details emerged. Allegations of abuse, control, and a life led under the tyranny of Simmons became the focus. Each piece of evidence added another layer to the dark portrait of a man who had lived a life of deception and brutality. In the courtroom, the full extent of his crimes would come to light, bringing some answers, but also leaving haunting questions about the nature of evil. What kind of man lurked behind the annihilation of his family and terrorizing a community? Simeon's life was marked by strict discipline and control, traits honed during his military career. But beneath the surface of this structured exterior lay a tumultuous inner world. Allegations of sexual assault within his family suggest deep-seated pathological behavior. Experts in criminal psychology often point to a history of abuse, either experienced or perpetrated, as a significant factor in the development of violent behavior. In Simmons' case, the blurring of boundaries within his own family coupled with a need for dominance may have contributed to his downward spiral. The isolation of the Simmons family at Mockingbird Hill paints a picture of a man intent on exerting absolute control. This isolation could have exacerbated existing mental health issues, creating a pressure cooker environment. What then triggered Simmons to turn to murder? The possibility of his wife seeking a divorce might have been the tipping point, challenging his authoritarian hold over his family. She had already tried to leave him on numerous occasions, but always returned. A family friend informed the police that Simmons' wife had been saving up money to divorce him when the murder happened. Simmons' wife had written to their son shortly before the killings, "I don't want to live the rest of my life with Dad. I am a prisoner here and the kids too. Every time I think of freedom, I want out as soon as possible." Simmons' actions in Russellville suggest a broader rage directed not just at his family, but at anyone he perceived as a threat or who had rejected him. His targeting of individuals in the community indicates a blend of personal vendetta and displaced aggression. Yet the absence of any recorded mental illness diagnosis leaves us with more questions than answers. The depths of Simmons' mind remain, in many ways, a locked enigma. Could this tragedy have been averted? In exploring these questions, we confront the unsettling reality of how little we sometimes know about those closest to us. After the chilling massacre by Ronald Gene Simmons, the wheels of justice began to turn, bringing us to a courtroom where the grim details of his crimes would be laid bare. After a psychiatric evaluation, it was determined that he was sane and capable to stand trial. Simmons' trial was a focal point of national attention, a legal battle to seek justice for the unprecedented atrocity he had committed. The proceedings were swift, reflecting the urgency of a community seeking closure. In May 1988, Simmons stood trial for the murders outside his family, specifically the killings of Kathy Kendrick and Jim Chaffin. The evidence presented was overwhelming, leaving little doubt about Simmons' guilt. Simmons, who had acted with such brutality, now faced the consequences of his actions in a court of law. His demeanor in court was reported as defiant, a stark contrast to the calculated coldness of his crimes. On May 12, 1988, the verdict was delivered. Ronald Gene Simmons was found guilty and sentenced to death by lethal injection, plus 147 years. Remarkably, Simmons himself requested that no appeal be made on his behalf, saying, "To those who oppose the death penalty, in my particular case, anything short of death would be cruel and unusual punishment." Because of this, he had to be separated from other prisoners on death row. His life was in danger as they believed Simmons' refusal to appeal his death sentence was jeopardizing their prospects of escaping their own executions. The second trial for the murders of his 14 family members began in February 1989. Here, the prosecution delved into the harrowing details of the family massacre, painting a picture of a man driven by control and rage. During the trial, a shocking moment unfolded. Simmons lashed out in court, punching the prosecutor and attempting to seize a deputy's gun, an act that only outed to his infamy. This happened after Simmons' letter to his daughter, Sheila, was introduced, in which Simmons said, "You have destroyed me, and you have destroyed my trust in you. I will see you in hell." After she had disclosed that he was her child's father to the police, on February 10, 1989, Simmons was found guilty of 14 counts of capital murder. The judge, undeterred by Simmons' outburst, handed down another death sentence. This rapid succession from trial to sentence was unprecedented, reflecting the severity of the crimes. The execution warrant for Simmons was signed by Arkansas Governor and later President Bill Clinton on May 31, 1990. All visitors, including legal counsel and clergy, were refused by Simmons. On June 25th, he died via the fatal injection method he had chosen in the Cummins unit. This was the shortest period from sentence to execution to death in U.S. history since the death penalty was reinstated in 1976. His last words were, "Justice delayed finally be done is justifiable homicide." Nobody claimed his body, and he was buried in a common grave in Lincoln County, Arkansas. As we reflect on the legal proceedings against Ronald Gene Simmons, we are left to ponder the balance between justice and understanding. The case of Ronald Gene Simmons is a stark reminder of the potential for hidden dangers within our own homes, and it's crucial to recognize early warning signs. FBI profilers and psychologists suggest vigilance for certain behaviors, patterns of control, isolation, and abuse within a family. These can often be precursors to more violent actions. In cases like Simmons, where the perpetrator isolates the family, the intervention of external agencies becomes critical. Neighbors, friends, and relatives need to be attentive and proactive in reporting any suspicions. But perhaps the most profound lesson lies in understanding the human psyche. Simmons' case demonstrates the complex interplay of psychological factors that can lead to such extreme behavior. What led Ronald Gene Simmons to commit such heinous acts? The answer lies in a complex web of control, abuse, and psychological instability. His desire for dominance coupled with deep-seated issues, Simmons' military discipline juxtaposed with his chaotic personal life created a volatile mix. The isolation and control he exerted over his family only fueled his capacity for violence. And when his authority was threatened possibly by a looming divorce, it may have been the catalyst for the massacre. John Harris, one of Simmons' defense attorneys, said of his abused family, "I think he felt like they are going to take him out. He's going to take them out first." I think that was his mindset. Could anything have been done to prevent the carnage? In hindsight, the warning signs were there. Isolation, abuse, and a man teetering on the edge. Timely intervention could perhaps have altered this tragic course. Simon's story is a grim reminder that behind closed doors, within seemingly normal families, the seeds of tragedy can grow unnoticed. People feared him even back then in New Mexico. They said he was strange, unfriendly, antisocial. He didn't have much to say. A friend of his daughter's said, he had a beer in his hand all the time. He had one little room he would stay in all the time. It was dark and seemed spooky, and it stunk. Attorney John Harris also said that there was more than one person to blame. If authorities had successfully arrested him back in Mancom 81 on the basis of his daughter's sexual assault, the murders likely wouldn't have happened. However, Prosecutors at the time said they had dropped the charges at the family's request. Ronald Gene Simmons' Christmas week killing spree is the worst mass murder committed by a single person in Arkansas history. What were the underlying reasons that made Simmons annihilate his whole family that once formed the core of his identity? In 1981, Lieutenant Ronald Oliver was a highly respected veteran of the Memphis Police Department, where he had served diligently for 2 decades. At home, he was a devoted father to his 11-year-old daughter Paula from his first marriage. 2 years into his second marriage to Sandra, he embraced his role as a stepfather to her son, Vic. The family had recently purchased 5 acres of land, where Lieutenant Oliver planned to build a log cabin with his stepson, reflecting his hands-on approach to life and family. Despite having a desk job that offered safety, Lieutenant Oliver frequently chose to go on patrol. Known for his intelligence, dedication, and integrity, he prioritized justice over departmental politics and was deeply loyal to his colleagues. Philip Ray Workman, on the other hand, had a tumultuous start in life. Born on June 1, 1953, at Fort Campbell in Kentucky, he grew up on various military bases. His mother was absent, and his father was harsh and abusive. Workman's troubled upbringing led him to run away multiple times, culminating in his placement at Gatesville, a reform school in Texas infamous for its abusive practices, which eventually led to its closure. After his release at 17, Workman's father arranged for him to enlist in the Army. Stationed in California, Workman was introduced to drugs, marking the beginning of a downward spiral. Discharged from the Army in 1973, he quickly found himself in legal trouble, serving more than half of a 5-year sentence for burglary and drug possession in Georgia. His life after the Army was marked by instability and crime, setting the stage for a fateful intersection with Lieutenant Oliver. By 1981, Workman was married and had an 8-year-old daughter, Crystal. He also had a serious drug addiction. He left Columbus, Georgia, where he had been living with his family and working odd jobs to support them, and began hitchhiking and drifting throughout the Southeast. By August, he was in Memphis, Tennessee. On August 5, 1981, Workman was almost out of money and out of drugs. High on the last of the cocaine he had, he entered the Wendy's on North Thomas late that evening. He ordered a burger and lingered inside the restaurant for almost an hour. Around 10 p.m., closing time for the restaurant, Workman pulled out his .45 caliber pistol and herded the employees, as well as the one remaining customer, into the manager's office. He demanded money and was given the $11.70 the restaurant had on hand in a mixture of bills and coins. Since he had no means of escape, he demanded the car keys from one of the employees. He then spent a few minutes struggling to get the house key off of the keychain so that he could leave it with the person whose car he was in the process of stealing. One of the teenage employees, who had been told to sit on the floor of the office, told Workman that he had a cramp in his leg and needed to stand up. Workman told him that was all right. When the employee Lieutenant Oliver's position within the department meant that he did not have to respond to alarm calls. However, he was close to the Wendy's, and according to one of his coworkers, he had a get-things-done-yourself kind of attitude. When he pulled him to the Wendy's parking lot, Lieutenant Oliver was the first on the scene. As Lieutenant Oliver arrived in the parking lot, Workman was just walking to the exit of the restaurant. Lieutenant Oliver did not immediately realize that Workman was the robber. It appears that Lieutenant Oliver mistook Workman for the night janitor at the Wendy's because he announced over the radio that the call appeared to be a false alarm and that the cleanup crew was coming out. At roll call at the beginning of his shift, the lieutenant had been reminded, along with the other officers coming onto shift, to be on the lookout for an African-American man who had been robbing fast food restaurants at closing time in the neighborhood. Lieutenant Oliver may have assumed that this robbery was part of that spree and not identified Workman as a suspect because he did not meet the description of the individual who had been robbing area restaurants. Lieutenant Oliver and Workman began walking out of the restaurant. As a second police officer, Officer Aubrey Stoddard, arrived on the scene. However, the situation quickly deteriorated. Workman tried to make a run for it as he exited the Wendy's and was ordered to stop. At this point, Workman's account and Officer Stoddard's account become very different. Workman's account is problematic not only because it is in his best interest to make himself look innocent, but also because he was high at the time, and by his own admission, his recollection of that night is impaired. According to Workman's account, he tripped on the curb that separated the Wendy's parking lot from that of the neighboring Holiday Auto Parts store as he tried to escape. Hearing the officers catching up to him, he decided to surrender. Kneeling near the curb, he yelled, "I give up," and took the gun from his pants to surrender it. He was then hit over the head with a flashlight and the gun went off, shooting a bullet straight up into the air. He then heard gunfire from behind him and took off running. He cocked his weapon, which discharged a live round. A few moments later, he tripped, and his gun fired again. According to Officer Stoddard, after Workman tried to escape, Lieutenant Oliver caught up and grabbed him from behind. Stoddard then ran up and grabbed Workman from the front. Workman then took out his weapon, which left it sandwiched between his stomach and Officer Stoddard's. Workman then fired the gun, striking Officer Stoddard in the arm. The shot sent Officer Stoddard flying backwards. He says he heard Workman firing wildly at this time, emptying his revolver. By the time he got up, Lieutenant Oliver was wounded on the ground, firing his weapon in Workman's direction. He saw Workman leap over a fence and go into an adjacent neighborhood. Eventually, the evidence collected at the scene would match closer to Workman's account, at least in terms of the number of shots he fired. 2 spent cartridges and a live round were found closer to where Workman had struggled with the officers, and one was found near where Workman claims to have tripped in the auto parts store parking lot and fired again. This does leave 1 cartridge unaccounted for and may be from the bullet that wounded Officer Stoddard. Shooting Officer Stoddard is absent from Workman's account. Civilian witnesses did also report seeing Workman running across the store parking lot, clutching his head, wound with his right hand, which also held the stolen bag of money and a jacket. His gun was in his left hand. The 3rd officer on the scene, Officer Stephen Parker, had arrived on the scene at approximately the same time as Officer Stoddard and followed him into the parking lot. Having been trained to block all the entrances when responding to this kind of call, he stopped on the south side of the building because he saw Officer Stoddard drive around to the north side of the building. He tried the door to the restaurant, but it was locked. He then heard 2 gunshots and ran to the other side of the building. Lieutenant Oliver was already on the ground, and he saw Workman shoot Officer Stoddard. He says he could not pull out his own weapon because his holster had slid around, so he called out to Workman instead. Officer Parker lost sight of Workman after he ducked behind the parked pickup truck he had been standing near, startled by the arrival of another officer. Officer Parker ran to Lieutenant Oliver, who was already turning blue. After the shooting was called in over the radio, the Wendy's parking lot was quickly swarmed with police officers and paramedics. Lieutenant Oliver was transported to the hospital, suffering from 1 gunshot wound that went completely through his chest cavity. Despite the best efforts of doctors and nurses, Lieutenant Oliver died as a result of the gunshot wound. He was only 43 years old. The area around the Wendy's was searched with dogs, helicopters, and police officers on foot for Workman. A witness saw him hiding under a truck and helped narrow down the search area. When Workman was eventually discovered amongst a group of bushes, police dogs were given the command to attack him. He was taken to the hospital to receive 7 stitches for a head wound and to be treated for shotgun wounds to his backside as well as dog bites. He was then taken to jail, where he began experiencing the symptoms of drug withdrawal. On May 11, 1982, Workman was found guilty of the felony murder of Lieutenant Ronald Oliver. He was sentenced to death. Workman was represented by public defenders at his trial. He would later sue them for negligence, although the court ruled that they had done their jobs adequately. Workman claims that they were of the opinion that if he did not object to the facts as presented by the prosecution, they had a slim chance of getting Workman life in prison rather than the death penalty. They did not question the prosecution's main eyewitness, attack any inconsistencies in the statements made by Officer Stoddard and Parker, and did not look at any of the ballistics. Workman spent the rest of the 80s-90s going through the lengthy appeals process required of death row inmates. These proceedings did little to actually challenge Workman's death sentence until 1990 when he got new legal representation. By the end of the decade, there will be serious doubts about whether or not Philip Workman actually shot Lieutenant Oliver on that night in 1981. The major debate surrounding this case involves whether or not a bullet from Workman's gun could have been the bullet that killed Lieutenant Oliver. This is important because Workman was sentenced to death for the felony murder of Lieutenant Oliver. Workman has never denied his culpability in the armed robbery. Workman's pistol fired .45 caliber silvertip hollow point ammunition. This type of ammunition generally expands once it enters the human body, mushrooming out as pressure around the inner edge causes it to expand. As a result, this type of bullet tends to stay inside the body rather than exit it. On occasions where it does exit a body, the exit wound is usually larger than the entrance wound due to the bullet's expansion. At Lieutenant Oliver's autopsy, it was determined that the bullet that killed him entered the left side of his chest, going through his 7th rib, and exited the right side of his back between his 5th and 6th ribs, striking his heart as it passed through his chest. The surface area of the entrance wound was almost 3 times the surface area of the exit wound. This could still be explained by the fact that hollow point ammunition often fragments as it expands. There was no evidence of additional wound paths found during Lieutenant Oliver's autopsy, however. An additional way to see if this fragmentation had occurred would be to examine an X-ray taken at Lt. Oliver's autopsy. Autopsy X-rays were not necessarily routine in 1981 as the Memphis morgue did not have the equipment to take them and had to enlist the help of a hospital when they were taken. Workman's lawyers asked for any films taken at the autopsy in preparation for his trial, and again in 1990 and in 1995. They were never turned over by the medical examiner's office. But this did not necessarily raise suspicion as there was no guarantee that such images existed. In 2000, while preparing for a clemency hearing, Workman's lawyers happened to notice reference Dr. O. Sebe Smith, the chief medical examiner for Shelby County, made to X-rays taken during the autopsy in a letter he had written in reference to the hearing. An X-ray had been taken at Lieutenant Oliver's autopsy after all. The X-ray did not show any bullet fragments left behind in Lt. Oliver's body, supporting the possibility that a .45 caliber bullet did not kill Lieutenant Oliver. According to Dr. Smith, the X-ray had simply been county morgue had been displaced due to a fire at the time of Lieutenant Oliver's autopsy and had moved facilities a few years after that. The only reason he had the X-ray was because of diligent research by some of his co-workers at his request. They apparently were not so diligent when trying to locate it to comply with court orders filed by the defense. Dr. Smith also did not make the X-ray available to the defense when it was given to him, arguing that he had no way of knowing that they would want to see it because he had been on active duty with the Navy Reserves when the 1995 court order was filed. Workman's lawyers in turn argued that the medical examiner's office had deliberately withheld the X-ray, suppressing evidence that a man is innocent of capital murder while preparing a report for use against him meets any definition of egregious that one consults, they claimed in a court motion. The court cannot condone fraud, particularly when the fraud aims at executing a man who is innocent of capital murder. Workman's defense lawyers had 2 prominent forensic experts whose testimony supported the theory that Lieutenant Oliver was not shot with a .45 caliber bullet. Dr. Chris Sperry, the chief medical examiner for the state of Georgia, and Dr. Cyril Wecht, the coroner for Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, who had consulted on many high-profile cases and previously served on the forensic pathology panel for the U.S. House of Representatives Select Committee on Assassinations. Dr. Sperry first became involved with the case in 1995 and testified at a clemency hearing for Workman in 2000. According to Dr. Sperry, Lieutenant Oliver's wounds are inconsistent with every .45 silvertip hollow point bullet. Dr. Wecht testified at a 2001 hearing that he believed within a reasonable degree of medical certainty that the bullets from Workman's gun could not have caused the injuries that killed Lieutenant Oliver. According to Dr. Wecht, the injuries were more consistent with those caused by a .38 caliber bullet, the kind of ammunition used by the Memphis Police Department in 1981. This is one of the numerous controversial aspects of this case. In asserting his innocence, Workman is claiming that Lieutenant Oliver was killed as a result of friendly fire, being shot accidentally by one of his fellow officers. While there are inconsistencies between the accounts of the night of August 5, 1981, given by Officers Stoddard and Parker, they agree on 2 major points. Neither of them saw Lieutenant Oliver get shot, and no one besides Workman and Lieutenant Oliver fired a weapon at the scene. There are reports that neither Stoddard nor Parker's weapons were tested after Lieutenant Oliver's death, but it does appear that Officer Stoddard's weapon was tested and shown to have not been fired. A civilian witness named Steve Craig contradicts the assertion that Parker did not fire any weapon that night. Steve was friends with Officer Stoddard and saw him pulling into the Wendy's parking lot. Steve did not witness Lieutenant Oliver getting shot as he had ducked down in his car when he heard gunshots. He did, however, see Officer Parker firing a shotgun at Workman. This account is seemingly corroborated by the fact that Workman had shotgun wounds when he arrived at the hospital. Steve required emergency surgery for appendicitis in 1982, which prevented him from testifying at Workman's trial. In 1995, he provided Workman's lawyers with a signed affidavit describing what he had seen. He also claimed that he had been told by the police that there was no need to talk about this unless it was with someone from the department. The 6th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals would eventually rule that while Steve Craig's account was troubling, it was not relevant because he did see Officer Parker fire the shotgun until after Lieutenant Oliver was shot. In 2000, Dr. O.C. Smith dismissed the diagnosis of the doctors who treated Workman in 1981 and argued, based on a photograph of Workman's wounds, that they were just additional dog bites sustained during his apprehension. Lieutenant Oliver was not killed with a shotgun, so the presence of such a weapon at the scene does not directly support the friendly fire theory. However, it does imply that the account given by the 2 surviving officers does not provide a full inventory of the weapons in play at the scene. This implication is also, according to Workman's lawyers, supported by a bullet hole in a pickup truck parked in the Holiday Auto Parts parking lot, not far from where Lieutenant Oliver fell when he was shot. The bullet hole was photographed and listed in police reports as being from a .38 caliber bullet, but the bullet hole does not appear to have been fully forensically examined. As best as Workman's lawyers can tell from the photographs, the bullet hit the car at an angle indicating that it could not have been shot from Lieutenant Oliver's gun. The bullet cannot be tested because for some reason it was never collected from inside of the truck. According to the Memphis police, this was because the truck was locked. For some reason, the car was not impounded until the owner could be found and the police could gain entry into the vehicle. Without forensic analysis of this bullet to determine what gun it was fired from, Workman's lawyers can argue for the possibility that an unaccounted .438 was being fired at the scene. The general consensus in this case is that the bullet that killed Lieutenant Oliver has never been found. At Workman's 2000 clemency hearing, Dr. Smith argued that the bullet had been found at the scene. A deformed .45 caliber bullet had been found near the curb that divided the Wendy's and the auto parts store parking lots. The bullet was 104 feet past where Lieutenant Oliver had fallen. According to Dr. Smith, this means that the bullet had passed through Lieutenant Oliver because this type of ammunition would normally travel much farther, and the shortened travel distance shows that its speed had been hampered by hitting something. However, to prove that Workman shot the bullet at Lieutenant Oliver, Dr. Smith assumes that Workman shot the bullet at Lieutenant Oliver. The bullet is only 104 feet past Lieutenant Oliver if we assume that it came from Workman's position. The bullet was also found near where Workman says his gun went off accidentally the first time, sending a bullet straight up in the air. Dr. Smith performed an experiment using a dog's rib cage and ballistics gelatin that showed that an .45 caliber hollow point bullet would be deformed if it passed through a body. His experiments did not prove, however, that this would be the only scenario in which the bullet could become deformed. The bullet could have been damaged upon hitting the ground after being shot straight up and falling back down to the ground. As Dr. Smith correctly points out, the bullet was fired from Workman's gun to the exclusion of all other guns in the world, which we know because of tests performed on Workman's gun by the FBI. However, this still does not prove that it is the bullet that killed Lieutenant Oliver. In his testimony, Dr. Smith does not acknowledge that other tests on the bullet performed by the FBI showed no signs of blood or tissue on it. There is no physical evidence showing that the bullet ever struck a person in general, or Lieutenant Oliver specifically. Besides the ballistics evidence, the other major point of contention in this case is the prosecution's witness at the 1982 trial, Harold Davis. Davis called the police the day after Lieutenant Oliver's death and told them that he had been in the Wendy's parking lot the night before and that he had been just 10 feet away when Workman shot Lieutenant Oliver. He testified at trial that Workman had calmly pointed his gun at Lieutenant Oliver and shot him. The problem with Davis's testimony is that there is no actual indication that he was in the Wendy's parking lot. Davis claimed to have been in his car during the shooting and that he fled on foot, coming back for his car in the morning. His car is not seen in any crime scene photos, nor is it in any diagrams drawn of the scene by the police on the night of the shooting. None of the police officers at the scene saw him, nor did any of the 5 civilian witnesses in the area. It is hard to imagine that he was able to leave the scene without being noticed or how he was allowed to once other officers arrived at the scene. Vivian Porter, a family friend of Davis's, also came forward after the trial saying that she knew Davis wasn't at the scene of the crime that night because she had been with him. She says she had been unaware of Davis's involvement in the trial. According to Vivian Porter, she and Davis had been out buying drugs not far from the Wendy's on North Thomas on the night of Lieutenant Oliver's death. They were pulled over by a policeman, but before he came up to speak with them, he got a call on his radio and got back into his car and took off. Vivian and Davis drove past the Wendy's a little later in the evening and saw the heavy police presence there and assumed that the officer who had stopped them had left to respond to the scene. According to Davis's sister, he had a habit of calling in tips to the police about cases he had seen in the paper to try to get reward money that he could use to fund his drug habit. Davis left Memphis after the trial, living a transient lifestyle. Workman's new defense lawyers had wanted to speak to him since they were put on the case in 1990, but they would not have the chance until 1999 when they tracked him down to Phoenix, Arizona. In both a written and a videotape statement, Davis admitted to lying about being in the Wendy's parking lot and seeing Philip Workman shoot Lieutenant Oliver. His account of the night of Lieutenant Oliver's death differs from the one provided by Vivian Porter. Davis says they were sitting at a parking lot across the street from the Wendy's, smoking marijuana at the time of the shooting, but they were facing away from the scene. Davis says he was able to pick Workman out of a photo lineup because he had already seen his picture in the paper by the time police brought him in to speak to them. He alleges that the police explained the details of the crime to him and asked if he would testify to those facts. He agreed but changed his mind as the trial got closer and expressed his concerns to the police. He claims that after he did, a large man came to visit him, telling Davis that he and those close to him could be made to disappear if he did not testify as he had been told to. According to Davis, this is why he left the state after the trial. Harold Davis is not a very reliable witness. While I am skeptical of his claims that he was threatened and coached by the police, I am equally skeptical of his claims that he witnessed Lieutenant Oliver being shot. John Struthers, one of the prosecutors of the case, has said that he still believes Davis testified truthfully at the trial in 1982, even after hearing Davis's new statements. After hearing about the ballistics evidence and learning about Harold Davis's perjury testimony, 5 out of the 12 jurors convicted Workman and voted to impose the death penalty, signed affidavits saying that they would have changed their vote on the verdict, the sentence, or both if this information had been available at the time. Workman's lawyers were very vocal in the media about the doubts about Workman's guilt, and he began to receive support from the public. He also received support from a source most people probably would not have expected: Lieutenant Oliver's daughter, Paula Dedelia. Both Ms. Dedelia and her mother, L.T., Oliver's first wife, did not wish to see Workman executed. Ms. Dedelia publicly appealed for Workman's sentence to be reduced and for the new evidence in the case to be thoroughly examined, which I have to imagine was an emotionally taxing undertaking. Ms. Dedelia wrote a letter to the governor for Workman's clemency hearing in 2000 and also appeared in a video appeal to him asking that Workman's sentence be commuted to life in prison. My belief, my feelings are that Mr. Workman did not kill my father, and if so, I do not believe it was intentional. And I would like to see his sentence be reduced to at least life, she said in her taped statement. I know it's odd for me to be saying this, but it seems like there's a lot of questionable things relating to this case, and I would like to see someone look into it further. She also appeared at a news conference in 2000 with Workman's daughter Crystal, telling the press, "Taking her father, not bring mine back." While I have the utmost respect for Ms. Dedelia for the strength and compassion she showed by taking the stance she did, I do not want that respect to be interpreted as disrespect for those in Lieutenant Oliver's family who did not agree with her. Not everyone Lieutenant Oliver left behind shared Ms. Dedelia's views. Sandra Oliver Noblin, Lieutenant Oliver's wife at the time of his death, believed Workman was guilty and supported his execution. In a statement prepared for Workman's clemency hearing in 2000, she argued, "Clemency should not be an option for a person who takes another person's life. Philip Workman is not innocent of this murder. He killed Ronnie." In the same statement, she questioned how her former stepdaughter could reach her conclusions about her father's murderer, but acknowledged that Ms. Delia's opinion was her privilege in her choice between her and her God. There have been a lot of concerns raised over the behavior of and decisions made by the courts and public officials in regards to this case. Given the vast number of court appearances Workman made over the 25 years following his conviction, covering every single one of them is not practical, nor is it probably helpful. For the purpose of this video, we will just be examining Workman's 2001 evidentiary hearing to illustrate why some of these concerns arose. Due to the various legal challenges Workman and his defense team posed beyond the standard appellate proceedings required of inmates condemned to death, his execution date was set and then deferred several times over the years. On March 30th, 2001, Workman's execution was deferred less than an hour before it was scheduled to occur. Workman's lawyers had petitioned for a writ of error quorum nobis in Shelby County Criminal Court. In the state of Tennessee, this type of writ is issued in criminal proceedings for evidence discovered after the trial. The evidence has to relate to issues raised at the trial. A judge has to rule that the evidence could have resulted in a different verdict at the trial, that it is reliable, and that the defendant is not at fault for failing to discover the evidence sooner. The judge denied the petition. At 12:37 a.m., however, the Tennessee Supreme Court overturned the lower court's decision. The court was of the opinion that due process requires that Workman be granted a hearing to evaluate his claims that new evidence, which was unavailable at trial and which has never been evaluated in a hearing in this state's courts, shows that he is actually innocent of capital murder according to the order it released. The order was issued at 12:37 a.m. Workman's execution had been scheduled for 1 a.m. The Tennessee Supreme Court decision sent the case back to the judge who had originally denied the petition for an evidentiary hearing to fully examine the ballistic evidence and the evidence that Harold Davis had committed perjury at the original trial. That judge was Judge John P. Colton Jr. Judge Colton had also been the judge at Workman's trial in 1982. Judge Colton and Workman's lawyers had issues before the hearing even began. When the case was sent back to him, Judge Colton scheduled the hearing for just 2 weeks later, which gave Workman's lawyers only that small amount of time to prepare for it. That decision was overturned on appeal. Judge Colton ordered Workman's lawyers to turn over a videotaped statement made by Harold Davis to the prosecution. This tape should not have been made available to them until after Davis testified. Judge Colton's order was overturned on appeal. Judge Colton issued a gag order preventing the attorneys from communicating about the case outside of court. Judge Colton's order was overturned on appeal. Believing that these actions showed that Judge Colton was biased against Workman, Workman's attorneys asked him to recuse himself from the hearing. Judge Colton refused. It has been alleged that Judge Colton failed to protect the witnesses the defense presented at the hearing. DA Jerry Kitchen was allegedly verbally to both Harold Davis and Dr. Cyril Wecht, but Judge Colton said nothing about his method of questioning. Judge Colton also barred Wardai Parks, one of the jurors from Workman's trial, who said that he would not have found Workman guilty or sentenced him to death in light of the ballistics evidence and the purged testimony, who had also testified at Workman's 2000 clemency hearing, from testifying at this hearing. On one hand, this ruling makes sense as Mr. Parks could not provide new evidence in the case. On the other, however, the defense could have used his testimony to confirm that the new evidence would have changed the outcome of the trial, as they needed to for their petition to be successful. On January 7, 2002, Judge Colton ruled against Workman, stating that the new evidence presented by lawyers for death row inmate Philip Workman is insufficient to warrant a new trial. He found that Harold Davis's testimony did not amount to a recantation of his original trial testimony. Robert Hutton, one of Workman's lawyers, had gone over Davis's trial testimony line by line, and Davis had refuted each line of it. During the 2 days of questioning by DA Kitchen, however, he often claimed to have memory issues when asked specific questions and refused to say directly that he had lied under oath. Davis had to be rushed to the hospital after his testimony concluded, allegedly because the A. Kitchen was so abusive in his questioning. Judge Colton also held that the ballistics evidence did not merit a new trial because Dr. Wecht could not conclusively exclude the possibility that a .45 caliber bullet caused a fatal wound, even after viewing the autopsy X-ray. Workman was given a new execution date of September 24, 2003. On September 15, 2003, Tennessee Governor Phil Bredesen granted Workman a 4-month reprieve. When that reprieve was about to expire, he extended it by another 3 months. The reason for the reprieve turned out to be a federal investigation into Shelby County Medical Examiner, Dr. O.C. Smith. Dr. Smith had testified at a clemency hearing for Workman in 2000 and at the evidentiary hearing presided under Judge Colton in 2001. At both hearings, he argued against the testimony of Dr. Sperry and Wecht, maintaining that Workman's gun was the murder weapon. In June of 2002, Dr. Smith had been discovered, bound with barbed wire with a bomb around his neck, at the Regional Forensic Center. He claimed he had been attacked by an unknown assailant. Workman's case was originally considered to be a motive in the attack, and Workman was interviewed as part of the investigation. By the fall of 2003, however, Dr. Smith was being investigated for staging the attack himself. He was indicted on federal charges in February 2004 and went to trial in 2005. A video detailing this case will be linked in the description. Governor Bredesen did not extend Workman's reprieve any further because he had state medical examiner, Dr. Bruce Levy, who coincidentally would go on to face his own legal troubles, examined Dr. Smith's testimony in Workman's case, in light of the issue of Dr. Smith's credibility being raised by his indictment. Dr. Levy did not report any inaccuracies in Dr. Smith's testimony in either hearing, so Bredesen allowed plans for Workman's execution to move forward. The various appeals and proceedings delaying Workman's execution ran out in 2007. On May 4th, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit refused to grant Workman a stay of execution. That same day, however, a U.S. District Court judge issued a temporary restraining order barring the state of Tennessee from executing Workman. The restraining order was issued due to issues with the state's lethal injection procedures. In February of 2007, Governor Bredesen had rescinded Tennessee's instruction manual for lethal injections, citing deficiencies in the procedures it outlined. The manual still required procedures for execution by electrocution, even though it was supposed to be specifically for executions using lethal injection. The state's Commissioner of Correction had 90 days to write a new manual. The revised procedures were released on April 30th. Workman's lawyers were granted the restraining order so that they would have a chance to question if the new procedures were constitutional. At a hearing on May 7th, however, the restraining order was vacated by the U.S. Court for Appeals for the Sixth Circuit. Philip Workman was moved to death watch inside the Riverbend Maximum Security Institution. At 10 p.m. on May 8th, the U.S. Court refused to hear an appeal from Workman. At 12:15 a.m. on May 9th, the Tennessee Supreme Court refused to hear an appeal from Workman's lawyers, asking for additional time to review the state's new injection procedures. For his last meal, Workman had asked for a vegetarian pizza. Instead of having it brought to him, however, he asked that the pizza be taken to the nearby city of Nashville and given to a homeless person instead. The prison denied the request because taxpayer funds cannot be used for charity. Workman refused to select another last meal for himself in protest and did not take the prison standard meal tray when it was brought to him at 4:50 p.m. on May 8th. His actual last meal, as it were, was at 9:40 when he asked for and was brought grape juice while he met with a spiritual advisor. When word of Workman's denied last meal reached the public, people from around the country decided to fulfill his request. Teen crisis and homeless shelters in Nashville like the Oasis Center and the Nashville Rescue Mission became inundated with donations of vegetarian pizzas that had been ordered from all over the country. Pizzas were also sent by PETA President Ingrid Newkirk and a radio station in Minnesota. In Memphis, the Destiny Diner ran a promotion for the rest of the month of May, allowing people to buy their vegetable pizza at half price, with all the pizzas being donated to an area homeless shelter in the beginning of June. We don't condone violence or crime of any kind, and it's not our place to comment on Workman's sentence or execution, said Destiny Diner employee Hart Simha. But we do believe that his last request was honorable, and the excuse to feed the homeless is a good one. Workman's execution was scheduled for 1 a.m. on May 9, 2007. After he was strapped to the gurney in the execution chamber, curtains were opened to allow witnesses in another room to view the execution. Warden Ricky Bell asked Workman if he had any final words. "I've prayed to the Lord Jesus Christ not to lay charge of my death to any man," Workman, who had become a born-again Christian in the early 1990s, replied. He then closed his eyes and the process of injecting him with cocktail of drugs began. Approximately 2 minutes later, he said, "I commend my spirit into your hands, Lord Jesus Christ." According to the witnesses, he at that point appeared to become unconscious. Workman was declared dead at 1:38 a.m., almost 26 years after the death of Lieutenant Ronald Oliver. Lieutenant Oliver's widow, Sandra Oliver Noblin, and her son Beck were present at the execution. Workman's older brother Terry planned to attend but decided at the last minute not to witness the execution. I did not make this video to try to persuade anyone one way or the other about Philip Workman's guilt or innocence. I do not know if he was guilty or not, and I would never claim to. I personally do wish that there had been a new trial, however, or some other way for the controversial evidence to have been more fully evaluated in a neutral setting. I think this case was important to cover because it, like many other cases, shows just how politics and perspective play major roles in the criminal justice system. Prosecuting criminals is not as straightforward of a process as many of us would like to believe. Especially now in the age of DNA and advanced forensics, it is easy to assume that if a scientist claims that forensic tests say something is true, it must be true. This case reminds us that two different experts can look at the same evidence and arrive at completely different conclusions. Two different experts can look at the same evidence and tell two completely different stories about what happened at a crime scene. The same can be said about lawyers and judges. Different interpretations of the law and of legal statutes can result in vastly different rulings and opinions on how a case should be handled. I hope that the conflicting opinions and strong feelings held by the various legal and scientific experts in this case remind us all how vital it is to think critically about cases. My other major reason for covering this case is Lieutenant Oliver, especially in the early 2000s, as the controversy about the X-ray and Harold Davis's testimony was coming to light. This case was featured heavily in the local news in Memphis, where I grew up. I remember hearing about the case all the time and knowing that Workman was on death row for killing a cop. But I never knew that cop's name until a few years ago when I looked it up on my own. Between the anger, politics, accusations, and questions involved in this case, I fear that the focus of the case has shifted away from the man we lost. I believe the way in which cases are covered has changed in the past several years, and that the focus has been put back on the victims of violent crime. We are becoming more sensitive to the identity of a crime victim beyond what someone else did to them and the unique void their loss leaves behind. Having been killed in 1981, Lieutenant Oliver has not benefited from this change. The one picture of him I have shown in this video is seemingly the only one publicly available. After a lot of digging, I was able to find one more of him being loaded into the ambulance on the night of his death, but it hardly shows him and it seemed inappropriate to share in this video. Almost all of the information I shared about Lieutenant Oliver beyond his job and rank came from one article published in 2000. I wish I could share more about who Lieutenant Oliver was as a person because from what I can tell, he was a good man who deserves the respect of being remembered. Even though there is so little direct information available for us to learn about who Lieutenant Oliver was, we can still infer a lot about him from the legacy he leaves behind. A daughter who seemingly inherited his bravery and sense of justice. A widow with strong convictions and even stronger teeth. And his stepson who joined him in law enforcement, going on to become a captain in the Bartlett, Tennessee Police Department. I am sure that viewers of this video will have conflicting opinions about this case, but I am also sure that we all agree that Lieutenant Oliver's Workman was executed without a new trial, and others of you may feel anger at me for sharing the doubts raised about Workman's guilt. But my hope is that the main feeling you take away from this video is gratitude for Lieutenant Oliver's service and respect for his memory. For the Halbach family, October 31st, 2005, would become a harrowing reminder that nightmares can seep into reality. For Teresa Halbach, it began as just another workday. A freelance photographer for Auto Trader magazine, Teresa was assigned to photograph vehicles at Avery's Auto Salvage. She was never seen alive again. Reported missing on November 3, 2005, a widespread search for Teresa ensued. On November 5, 2005, her Toyota RAV4 was discovered partially hidden in the Avery salvage yard. Investigators found blood in the vehicle and, on the property, a burn pit containing charred bone fragments and teeth. Her car keys were later located in the bedroom of Stephen Avery, the salvage yard owner. Born on March 22, 1980, Teresa Halbach was one of 5 siblings. Her parents, Richard and Karen, raised their children on the family dairy farm. After her father's death when Teresa was just 8, Karen remarried Richard's brother, Thomas, and they continued raising their blended family. Teresa was an adventurous and outdoors-loving young woman who aspired to work for National Geographic as a photojournalist. Friends and family fondly remembered her as someone with an incredible gift for making others feel welcomed and valued. Her life, full of promise, was tragically cut short in circumstances that would haunt all who knew her. She was dedicated to her studies, making summa cum laude with a degree in photography. After graduating from the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay, Teresa continued to work with Pierce Photography, whom she interned with during her college days. She started her own business, Photography by Teresa, and operated out of the Pierce studio. She traveled extensively, and to supplement her income, she took on freelance jobs for Auto Trader magazine, taking pictures of vehicles that were put up for sale. It was this job that led to her untimely death. All the evidence found pointed to one person, Stephen Avery. Avery had contacted Teresa to set up an appointment to take pictures of his sister's minivan. According to records, she was last seen at 2:30 p.m. that afternoon. This was later confirmed by Stephen's nephew, Bobby, who told police he saw the car enter the salvage yard. Avery was initially charged with a weapons violation mutilation of a corpse. The blood found in the SUV proved a positive match for Avery's. A set of car keys belonging to Teresa found in Avery's room. All the while, Avery maintained his innocence, alleging the police were trying to frame him. He was in the middle of a civil lawsuit with Manitowoc County for $36 million. Stephen Avery, born July 9, 1962, is a Manitowoc County native, raised in Wisconsin alongside his 2 brothers, Charles and Earl, and sister Barbara by parents Dolores and Alan. He dropped out of high school with reports suggesting he had an IQ of 70. Stephen was no stranger to the law. In 1981, he served 10 months in jail following the burglary of a bar. A year later, he pleaded guilty to animal cruelty after pouring gasoline on this pet cat and tossing it into a bonfire. For this, he served another 9 months. In 1985, he threatened his cousin Sharon Morris by forcing her off the road and thereafter pointing a gun at her. He later alleged that he wanted her to stop spreading rumors. She'd filed a report alleging that he exposed himself on several occasions and was mooding in the front yard. Although he received a 6-year sentence for his crime, he was granted bail and released. However, it was a case of mistaken identity that had him locked away for nearly 2 decades. Penny Berenstain reported that she'd been walking along a beach near 2 Rivers when she was attacked and assaulted on July 29, 1985. Police believed the description she gave had a striking resemblance to Avery. She went on to choose his photo during an interview with police and later picked him out during a suspect lineup. He was arrested and charged with the attack on Jen Stein. A state-appointed forensic official claimed that a hair found on Avery's shirt was consistent with the victim's. This evidence led to his conviction in December 1985. All this despite a staggering 16 witness testimonies and a time-stamped receipt to prove his whereabouts at the time of the assault. Stephen was convicted of rape and attempted murder and sentenced to 32 years in prison. Avery maintained his innocence and appealed in both 1987 and 1996. Both appeals were denied by the higher court. In 2001, though, Stephen made contact with the Wisconsin Innocence Project. The organization took on the case, and in 2002, Stephen was exonerated after DNA evidence proved he was innocent. It was later learned that another man, Gregory Allen, committed the crime and did, in fact, confess to it in 1995. Deputies alleged that SHRP Deputy Thomas Koch-Eric received a call and said, "We already have the right guy. Don't concern yourself with it." Allen and Steve bore a striking resemblance. Allen also committed a similar crime in the same area that Bjornstam was attacked and was under police surveillance, but he was not considered a suspect. Allen was not even called up as a suspect in the lie-up. After 18 years, Stephen walked out a free man on September 11, 2003. He then went to file a civil lawsuit against former Sheriff Thomas Corcoran and former District Attorney Dennis Vogel to the tune of $36 million as freedom. However, wouldn't last long. When Teresa was reported missing, searches were conducted in the salvage yard. This was the place she had last been seen, as confirmed by Stephen's nephew, Bobby Gassi. Stephen claimed that he'd spoken to Teresa when she came by to take the photos and then she left. Apart from the bone fragments, SUV, car keys, and blood found in the car, a bullet with Teresa's DNA was discovered in the garage. While incarcerated for Teresa's murder, Stephen's lawsuit was settled in February 2006 and he was paid a mere $400,000. While in jail, Stephen's younger nephew, Brendan Dacey, was also questioned in relation to the murder. Brendan, who was 16 years old at the time of the murder, was interrogated by police without parental supervision or a lawyer being present. Brendan confessed to investigators that he and Stephen first assaulted Teresa before murdering her. They then burned her body to destroy evidence. I go down to put he was charged in March 2006 as an accessory to the murder. He later recanted his statement claiming that he'd been coerced by detectives. Brendan was charged with the same crimes as Stephen, although there was no physical evidence linking him to the crime scene. Stephen was convicted in March 2007 and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Later that same year, Brendan too was found guilty and given a life sentence with a possibility of parole in 2048. But there was not to be a cut and dry solution to the murder. The conviction sparked controversy. It was a sensational case. Stephen was the first of the Innocent Project's 174 exonerated convicts to be charged with a violent crime after being released. This caught the interest of aspiring filmmakers Laura Ricciardi and Moira Demos. Making a Murderer premiered on Netflix in 2015 and created a media maelstrom. The documentary, which took 10 years to research and produce, profiled the case of Steven Avery. The series chronicles the case timeline beginning with Stephen's wrongful conviction in 1985 and subsequent exoneration, civil lawsuit against the Manitowoc County, and the arrest of Stephen and Brendan in regard to the murder of Teresa Halbach. It received both praise and criticism from critics and those directly involved with Teresa's case. The story caused on an international level has driven to division in public opinion. A petition to have Stephen and Brendan pardoned was drawn up and sent to the White House. It garnered over 128,000 signatures, but still failed to make any impact. The White House stated, as the convictions were made in a state court, the president had no authority to pardon either defendant. There are those who firmly support the innocence of Stephen and Brendan. These include his immediate family, who have supported him and also pray for the real killer of Teresa to be found. Sandy Greenman, Stephen's ex-fiancée, is one such person. Greenman has been his avid supporter, going as far as to start a Facebook page to garner support and give exposure to the case. She described him as a model inmate. Greenman stated that people take a perverse pleasure in tainting Stephen's name. People like to say Steven Avery has been violent all his life, which is not true, she said. Most notably, though, was the support offered by Kim Kardashian. The socialite has been using her influence to advocate for a fair justice system. Having come across the case on a social media site, her interest was piqued. Although she has made appeals to the governor, even her level of influence has no sway. However, she hasn't given up and hopes to seek justice for both Stephen and Brendan. The other half feels Stephen is where he belongs. On that side of the coin is Jody Stokowski, another ex-fiancée. Jody initially pledged her support in Stephen's innocence during the documentary. Afterwards, she alleged that she had lied and it was all an act. Jody went on to explain to Nancy Grayson in an interview that he threatened to kill her and her family. The first thing I want to ask you is, do you believe Steven Avery killed Teresa Hallett? Yes, I do. Why? Because he threatened to kill me and my family, and he alleged that he wanted revenge on all women after his life was wrongfully stolen from him. Steven is the one person I can't trust. He's a monster, she said. The show also ignited a debate regarding the perspective covered by the documentary. For the supporters of Stephen and Brandon, they feel the points most significant to the trial were highlighted. Dean Strang, one of Stephen's attorneys, agreed that the documentary covered enough to give the public a chance to judge for themselves. He disagreed that the series was subjective. As for the relatives of Teresa, they say the show saddened them. The Halbach stated the show sought to entertain and seek profit from their loss. Teresa's aunt, Kay Jordana, and cousin-in-law, Jeremy Fournier, both stated that the show was one-sided. Former Calumet County District Attorney Ken Krantz alleges he was not given a chance to tell his side of the story. The filmmakers denied this and claimed that he refused to give an interview. In an interview with People magazine, Krantz alleges the documentary has left out key pieces of evidence. These include Stephen using a fake name when calling Teresa, DNA belonging to Stephen was found on the SUV's hood latch, and a ballistics report showed that the bullet found in the garage was fired from a rifle owned by Stephen. Krantz further alleges that prior to her murder, Teresa had once before made a trip to the Avery residence. When Stephen answered the door with only a towel on, she said she wouldn't go back because she was scared of him. In response to criticism from Krantz and other officials, the filmmakers said they'd given prosecutors the opportunity to answer questions. They believed that the documentary was a fair representation of the case and covered the most consequential evidence given during the trial. The documentary had its desired effect. It poked holes into the narrative of Stephen and Brendan's case by exposing allegations of police and prosecutorial misconduct, evidence tampering, and witness coercion. At the outset, Stephen called out the police for trying to frame him. This to avoid the county paying out the $36 million lawsuit he filed. Stephen believed his lawsuit would be undermined if he was convicted of another violent crime. To avoid a conflict of interest, Manitowoc County gave neighboring Calame County authority over the handling of the case. Part of the deal, however, was that Calame could use resources which included personnel from Manitowoc. The key in Stephen's room was found by a Manitowoc sheriff's deputy after several searches of the property. Another allegation made was regarding the blood evidence found in the car. Stephen and his defense team believe it was blood used from his prior conviction. Given credence to this scenario were the claims made by the defense. According to the Avery defense team, the vial containing Stephen's blood had been tapered with and a puncture hole was visible on the stopper. The prosecution, however, combated this claim by testing the blood for a preservative not found in fresh human blood and found none. Avery's defense team brought in an expert witness who stated it was not possible to tell if the negative result meant there was none of the preservative present or the typology to test itself was inconclusive. The documentary shone a spotlight on the men who have interrogation with regard to Brenton Dassey. Dassey was just 16 years old during the interrogation. Firstly, he was interviewed without the supervision of a lawyer or parent. It's understood that both he and his mother consented to the interrogation. But what piqued the interest of many was that Brendan had an IQ of 73, classifying him as intellectually challenged. Many have argued that his intellectual disability left him open to suggestion, particularly when it was shown that the Ree technique of interrogation was used. The Ree technique has been criticized for producing high rates of false confessions, especially from juveniles and the mentally impaired. The technique is used to make the suspect comfortable and eventually confess to crimes through familiarity with the interrogators. The interrogator then proceeds to tell the suspect that the evidence shows that the suspect did commit the crime. Dassey allegedly agrees with the interrogators during the interviews, but later recants at his confession. He accused his first defense team of collaborating with the prosecution to get him to confess. Is this your smile? Yeah. Here's your roll. Yeah. He's also claimed the coercion was used to elicit a confession from them. Both Stephen and Brendan have appealed their convictions, but have been denied innumerable times and remain in prison. The defense teams of both men have exhausted their efforts in trying to get retrials on both men's charges. Following the making a murder documentary and the public outcry regarding Stephen and Brendan's innocence, significant new developments have occurred in both their legal teams. Professors Loring Ariiter and Stephen Dreisen of the Northwestern University Center on Wrongful Convictions of Youth are representing Brendan. They too began with numerous appeals and have come up against many hurdles. Both have refused to give up just yet. Meanwhile, Stephen's appointment of Kathleen Zellmer has shaken up the case and given further hits to the prosecution's claims. His previous lawyers, Deems Trang and Jerry Buting, have taken their newfound fame and gone on tour to promote and bring attention to the case of Stephen Avery. Zellner, considered a trailblazing trial lawyer, has been responsible for overturning 19 wrongful convictions. Her dogged determination and careful analysis of cases has seen her uncover missing evidence that helped exonerate her clients. Most recently notable, she was a consultant for Johnny Depp and his defense team during his trial. Zellner hit the ground running once she was appointed to Stephen's defense team and firmly believes her client is innocent. One of the first things she put to rest was the alleged confession of Joseph Evans Jr. Evans alleged he was responsible for killing Teresa and trying to frame Stephen. Zellner stated that it was a not-so-subtle attempt at publicity. Previously, Evans played snitch and allegedly wrote a 9-page letter to media outlets claiming he heard Stephen confess to the murder. This time, though, it seems he wanted in on a portion of reward money to make his life in prison more comfortable. However, his claim is not gaining the traction he expected. In August 2016, Zellner filed a motion demanding new scientific testing be done. Willing to pay for the extensive testing, Zellner intended to use this evidence to prove that Stephen had been framed. The theory was that 3 different burn pits showed evidence of human remains being burned. A particularly significant find was thought of a human pelvic bone fragment, a bone that was given to the Halbachs as part of Teresa's remains. This action, claims Zellner, was proof that Teresa's remains were planted in Stephen's burn pit. The defense, however, didn't get the opportunity to test these bones as they were not disclosed to them. This was a Brady violation according to Zellner, meaning that evidence which could have helped exonerate Stephen was not disclosed in the proper manner with regards to the criminal case. Crucial evidence was just out of their reach. Zellner remained relentless in her pursuit for justice. She approached the case with a new angle, one that could potentially point to a new suspect in the case. Being unable to test the bone fragments, Zellner opted for forensic testing of the Daisicki family computer. What she found on it was damning. Pornographic images of women in various stages of torture, violent images and videos depicting women as victims. All these images were allegedly accessed at times when Bobby Dassey was at home. Furthermore, Zellner pointed out that Barbara, Bobby and Brendan's mother, along with Stephen's sister and her husband, Stott Todick, were trying to get rid of evidence that could implicate Bobby. The forensic team were able to download 2,449 pages of data from the computer to a CD-ROM to present as part of the motion for a retrial. On it were all the searches, videos, and photos accessed by Bobby. Bobby is the older brother of Brendan and the nephew of Stephen. He was also the key eyewitness for the prosecution at Stephen's trial. He alleged that he last saw Teresa going to his uncle's house, and when he returned from hunting that afternoon, did not see her or the car again. Added to these claims are the allegations of his half-brother, Brad Dassey. Brad is alleged to have said he believes his uncle is innocent. He also made claims that his stepmother, Barb, and Stephen's brother-in-law, Scott, wiped the computer, deleting all pornographic material. Allegedly, Barb has filed a harassment suit against Brad following a conversation they had about tracing deleted files from a computer, which some believe is, in part, to ensure Brad remains silent about his knowledge. For Bobby, though, the final nail in this coffin could be the evidence that exonerates Stephen and, in turn, Brendan. An eyewitness has come forward claiming to have seen Bobby being assisted by a much older man, pushing Teresa's SUV back into the salvage yard. Thomas Sawinski stated in a sworn affidavit that he drove by Bobby and the other man while en route to deliver newspapers. When he passed the duo a second time, Bobby allegedly stepped out in front of his car to stop him. Thomas swerved to avoid him and continued on his morning route. He said that Bobby's eyes showed he was not pleased to see him there. Following the discovery of the SUV, Thomas realized the significance of the find and contacted police. He told them everything he'd seen that morning, and their response was, "We already know who did it." He provided his details, but he never heard back from them. For Zellner, this provides a contradiction to the prosecution's key witness. If proven true, which he's confident about, Bobby's testimony would be false. Zellner believes the rejection of all the crucial evidence in favor of Stephen denied him a fair chance to prove his innocence years ago. The newly filed motion is still with the appeals court and is awaiting an opinion or decision to be read over in November 2022. Stephen Avery continues to maintain his innocence. Kathleen Zellner, in her own words, says she represents the wrongfully convicted and added, "If you lie to her, she will find you out." Could Stephen be the scapegoat to a bigger conspiracy? Is this all a conspiracy to discredit Stephen's claim of improper police procedure? Or was there a monster truly hiding within Stephen all these years? Please let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. On July 31st, 1999, 17-year-old high school seniors and best friends, J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hallett, began their journey from their hometown of Dothan, Alabama. They were headed towards a birthday party for J.B. in Headland, Alabama, but the girls ended up getting lost along the way. In a phone call to her mother from Ozark around 11:30 p.m., Tracy informed her mom that they were heading back home. However, neither girl would ever make it home. Their lifeless bodies would be found the next day in the trunk of their car, raising the long-debated question of what might have happened to them. Did it have something to do with the party? Or did the girls run into trouble on the road heading back from Ozark? Located in southeast Alabama near the Florida border, Ozark is known as the home of Fort Worker. Situated in the heart of Dale County, it's a typical charming southern town. Home to nearly 15,000 people, it's a nice place for both raising a family and spending retirement years. However, the town was not the sort of place to hit the headlines until the gruesome double homicide of two high school seniors in 1999, which baffled the community for years to come. J.B. Hilton Green Beasley was born on July 31, 1981 to parents Cheryl and Hilton Lanier Beasley in Troy, Alabama. After her parents separated, she moved to Dothan with her mother in 1984. She was adored by her mother as well as her stepfather Joey Bagun, whom her mother married after a few years. She grew up in a nice home in Dothan along with her four sisters. J.B. grew up to be a very outgoing girl who was involved in various activities including cheerleading, dance, piano, and swimming. She even modeled for several agencies along with her sisters. Besides all of her hobbies, she loved hanging out with her friends and family. It was high school where J.B. met her fellow cheerleader, Tracy Hallett, and the two did not take long to become best friends. Tracy Jean Hallett was born on March 3, 1982 to parents Carolyn Robert Hallett. Unfortunately, her father, who worked in the Dothan Police Department, died when Tracy was only 5 years old. Her mother later remarried a man named Mike Roberts, who helped raise Tracy along with her mother. Unlike J.B., Tracy was a bit shy, but never hesitated to put people before herself. She was also very protective over her two brothers, who were much younger than her. Even at a young age, she was a responsible older sister. Tracy also attended Northview High School and regularly received good grades and was a cheerleader alongside J.B. As both girls were blossoming into their adulthood, J.B. and Tracy were oblivious to their dreadful fate, which would strip them of all their future hopes and dreams. On July 31, 1999, at around 10 or 5 p.m., J.B. and Tracy left Dothan in J.B.'s black 1993 Mazda 929 to attend a birthday party organized in J.B.'s honor in Headland, just a few miles north. However, the young girls, being unfamiliar with the roads leading to their destination, soon found themselves in trouble. Within a few minutes of starting their journey from their hometown, they got lost. Around 10:30 p.m., J.B. and Tracy stopped at a BP gas station at the intersection of directions. Using a payphone at that gas station, they called their friends to get better directions to the party. After the call, the girls kept driving to reach their destination, but instead ended up in Ozark, Alabama, about 24 miles northwest of Headland. Realizing they still did not understand the directions to the party, at 11:30 p.m., the girls stopped at the Big Little store. Although the store was already closed by then, Tracy called her mother from the store's payphone. She informed her of how they got lost and ended up in Ozark and that they were now planning to come back home. At the same time, a woman named Marilyn Merritt and her daughters stopped at the gas station to buy a soda. The girls then asked her for directions back to Dothan. Marilyn tried to explain the way as well as she could, and the young girls seemed to understand. Marilyn would later say that she noticed that the girls looked nice and polite with a clean and tidy car. Marilyn remembered seeing the girls pulling out of the parking lot and turning right just as Marilyn had directed. Although nothing seemed amiss at the time, J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hallett never made it home. The following morning, August 1st, 1999, at around 8 a.m., Tracy's mother called the police to report her daughter missing. It did not take police long to find their first clue regarding the girls' whereabouts. Later that day, after Tracy was reported missing, cops successfully located JB's car, which had been parked on Herring Avenue in Ozark. The most bizarre thing was, despite having filled the gas tank the day before, the tank was almost empty. The car was muddy. The driver's side window was partially down, yet the doors were locked. However, police could not find any signs of a forced entry into the vehicle. Inside the car, JB's driver's license was lying on the dash. The presses of both girls were still inside the car along with their cash. The only known missing item was JB's car keys. However, there was no sign of either of the girls. A palm print was recovered from the trunk lid of the locked trunk, which gave the police a foreboding feeling that something was horribly wrong. Assessing the scene, Pumps theorized that the locked trunk could provide them with significant clues. But without the keys, they could not open the trunk. It took them 6 long hours to discover that they could open the trunk of the car with the help of an interior latch without needing a trunk key or a locksmith. Upon opening the trunk, police made a grisly discovery. The lifeless bodies of the 2 girls were stuffed inside. Both girls were fully clothed, but their pants were soiled from the waist down. Both girls had been shot once in the head, in the temple, and JB in the right cheek. Tracy had a 9mm shell casing on her leg, scratches on her arm, and her jeans had thorn briars on them. Baby's clothes, on the other hand, were muddy and dirty, especially her newly purchased shoes. Although authorities concluded that the teenagers were killed execution style, they had most likely been killed inside of the trunk. As the families were informed about the heart-wrenching discovery, authorities formally started their homicide investigation. Although investigators were considering robbery as a possible motive during the initial phase of the investigation, it was quickly ruled out after confirming that not only the girls' purses, but also their jewelry, money, and credit cards remained inside the car. Autopsies later confirmed that there were no traces of alcohol or drugs in their system. The report also suggested that the girl had been sexually assaulted prior to their demise. This basically ruled out the possibility of the crime being sexually motivated. However, more than 2 months later, the state crime lab issued a report indicating that there were traces of unknown semen on JB's bra, panties, and skin. The palm print recovered from the lid of the trunk also remained unidentified. With no matches in the system and no one to compare their evidence against, authorities were left without much to go on. As word of a double murder of 2 teen girls spread like wildfire, authorities were no close to zeroing in on a suspect. A reward was also put out in an attempt to gather information regarding the murder, but it did not uncover any new leads. However, authorities, it seemed, soon got an unexpected breakthrough. On September 1st, exactly 1 month after the bodies of JB and Tracy were found, a longtime Ozark resident, 28-year-old Johnny William Barrington, walked into the Ozark Police Department to tell a bizarre story. He claimed that he had been a witness to the high-profile double homicide of the Dothan teenagers. Barrington told police that on the night of the murders, around the same time Tracy Hall had called her mother from the pay phone at the Big Little store, he went out to buy milk for his 2-year-old son. He claimed that while he was out, he had witnessed the horrendous act. He returned home at 1 a.m., visibly upset, and told his wife that he'd been hit by a black truck near Herring Road. In the days following JB and Tracy's murder, when he shared the information with some of his friends, they convinced them that he should go to the police with this information as it could be linked to the murders of Tracy and JB, which would not only help police crack the case, but could also get him the reward as well. Disturbingly, in the 4 hours of interview with Ozark police, Barrington changed his story 6 times. According to then Ozark Police Chief Tony Arspivey, Barrington initially said that on the night of the killings, he had seen a black truck speeding away from the area where the girls were found. But as the interview continued, his story kept evolving and changing. Finally, he claimed that he picked up a tattooed man he didn't know and the two drove by the Big Little store. He further claimed that the man to whom he'd given a ride got into a car with two girls, whom Barentine identified as the deceased Dotham teenagers. He said they ended up on Herring Avenue, where the man forced the girls out of the car. A struggle occurred between the man and the girls as they were trying to get away. After placing them in the trunk, Barentine said, he saw something in that man's hand moments before hearing two gunshots. And when the man returned, Barentine again gave him a ride from the scene and then went home. In another version, Barentine confessed to investigators that he knew the men he'd picked up and given a ride to and identified him to be his neighbor. Alarmingly, Barentine himself lived less than a mile from where police discovered the bodies. Police did not buy his story, naming him the prime suspect in the murder of J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hollett. Ozark police arrested Johnny Barentine on the spot, charging him with 2 counts of capital murder. But there were several problems with his accounts. Barentine never mentioned sexual activity that would account for the semen found on JB's clothing and body. Besides, the neighbor he implicated had an alibi for the evening. Several people noted that he looked startled and like he had just awoken from a deep sleep in his mugshot. Just after arrest, Barentine immediately admitted that he had fabricated the whole story in order to collect the reward money. However, police at the time believed they arrested the right person. In the preliminary hearing on September 21st, Aladad of the Bureau of Investigation agent Charles Hudums testified that Barentine was able to describe the girl's clothing and other items consistent with the crime, suggesting he was there at the scene. From the time of his arrest, Barentine was held without bond in the Dale County Jail in Ozark. In an October 18th bond hearing, Barentine denied he was involved in the killings, confessing to the judge that he never picked up a tattooed man and didn't see anything the night of the murders. He said that he simply went to the BPE at about 11 p.m. to get milk for his little boy and later fabricated the whole story to claim the reward money. However, he was denied the bond and sent back to jail. Even during this turbulent time, Barentine's family members never stopped supporting him. They even gave interviews to the media professing his innocence, saying he was incapable of hurting anyone. Barentine's lawyer, Bill Kimmons, also maintained that his client was not responsible for the double murders in any way, shape, or form. He further stated that the 4 hours of continued interrogation took a toll on Barentine, who had wrapped himself in this mess of a lie. June police questioning. He was never told that he could go to the bathroom or was free to leave whenever he wanted. Barentine's defense also pointed out the fact that Barentine only finished the 7th grade and a portion of the 8th grade. He said his client was in special education classes, indicating his inability to plan this heinous crime. Barentine was finally released from jail on December 17, 1999, after it was revealed that Barentine's DNA did not match fat from the semen front on JB's body and clothing. In January 2000, a Dale County grand jury declined to indict Barentine and cleared on the suspect in this double murder. After Johnny Barentine was cleared of suspicion, the investigation endured a setback. The methods employed by investigators were also criticized. There began to be mutterings that the Ozark police were incapable of handling the case. However, police still had some potential suspects. Investigators discovered that the man, who was not publicly named, left town within days of the murders. Investigators have even traveled to Michigan 3 times to interview him. He could not account for 3 or 4 hours of his time on the night of the murders and later made some suspicious statements to people. However, the police declined to elaborate on these alleged statements. As it turned out, he was also later ruled out by DNA. One other significant lead police were chasing during the initial phase of the investigation was the driver of a small white pickup truck. A video surveillance camera inside the Big Little store caught a grainy, poor quality image of what appeared to be a small white pickup truck at the gas pumps at the same time JB and Tracy were at the payphone, Cullen Tracy's mother. No digital trail could be traced, though, as there was no record of a gas purchase at the pump at that time. The video neither showed anyone getting out of the truck, nor did it show the driver clearly. After releasing a photo of the truck to the media a month into the investigation, police urged the public to come forward with information. Unfortunately, Both the driver and the truck vanished into thin air as the lead faded away. The last lead for the investigators was a man from Mississippi. Police said the man, who was extradited from Jones County, had been arrested there on an outstanding warrant for possession of drug paraphernalia issued in Ozark. The man had been staying with relatives in Ozark, but left 2 days after the murders. According to Spivey, investigators wanted to question him in connection with the case. However, no significant information came out in light of this lead. Without any evidence, investigators were forced to let him go. In March of 2000, a woman called police and said she heard screams and 2 gunshots near Highway 123 South, just inside the city limits, on the night of July 31, 1999. When asked why she did not come forward earlier, she claimed she was scared to get involved. Based on her description, police thoroughly searched the area and discovered a 9mm bullet, the same type used to kill the girls. But the brand name of the bullet did not match the brand of bullet shell casing found on Tracy's body. Furthermore, the unspent bullet had no markings that would help with forensic comparison to other evidence in the case. Again, another dead end for investigators. Although several leagues over the years proved to lead nowhere, investigators never lost hope in the search for a DNA match. As the heartbroken families of JB and Tracy tried to get on with their lives, the case turned cold. Then years later, another twist in a case added another layer to the thrilling mystery. After remaining cold for years, 2015 would mark a bombshell allegation in the murder case of J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hallett. Rena Crum, a sworn Ozark Auxiliary Police officer, came forward and openly accused an Ozark police officer of murdering J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hallett and others of covering it up. Rena alleged that on the night of July 31, 1999, a police officer for Ozark Police pulled over J.B. Beasley, demanded to know the whereabouts of some cassette tapes that contained recorded conversations. According to Rena, these tapes could have incriminated Ozark police officers regarding the illegal business of cocaine distribution and profits. The incident escalated into the murders of 2 innocent teens, she further alleged. Rena claimed that she'd been threatened by multiple law enforcement officials who had knowledge of the murderer's identity and covered it up by getting rid of evidence. Rena named 3 cops, Gary Butch Whittington, Rex Tipton, and Eddie Henderson, accusing them of harassing and threatening her. She went as far as to say that then Police Chief Tony Spivey, who had held the original investigation, had also helped cover it up. However, she shied away from revealing the name of the police officer who, she claimed, had actually committed the murders. Renowned American journalist and newspaper editor, John B. Carroll, wrote an article saying that he believed the officer in question presumed the 2 girls intended to use these tapes in a court case that was scheduled for August 2, 1999, less than 48 hours after they were murdered. The tapes were to be entered as evidence into that case. In this article, Carroll also stated that Rena was severely beaten with a baseball bat after coming forward, which stopped her from naming the actual killer. A law enforcement officials Rena accused had all denied having any involvement in the murders of J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hallett. Without any physical evidence, none of them were ever formally named as a suspect in the case. Regardless of that, the allegations blew up on numerous true crime websites and social media, leading to a defamation lawsuit. On January 29, 2016, Keith Coffin, Rex Tipson, Tony Spivey, Eddie Henderson, and Gary Butch Whittington, all Ozark, Alabama police officials, filed a lawsuit against Rena Crum, John B. Carroll, and Dean Matthews for libel, slander, and defamation of character. That case was dismissed in 2018. In May 2016, Rena Crum received a suspended sentence and a $250 fine after being convicted for harassing J.B. Beasley's sister. Over the years, authorities investigated many theories. They interviewed hundreds of people and took DNA samples from several suspects, but to no avail. It would take 20 years and the innovation of new DNA technologies before police could apprehend a suspect. In March 2019, investigators sent the DNA found on JB's bargain close to the Virginia-based Parabon Nanolab, which specializes in DNA phenotyping and genetics using public genealogy databases. After analyzing the DNA, the lab finally made a connection to a suspect, Coley McCraney. 45-year-old Coley Lewis McCraney was never on the radar of investigators in the brutal 1999 murders of J.B. Beasler and Tracy Hallett until DNA implicated them in the crime. McCraney, who's an Alabama native, graduated from Carroll High School in Ozark in 1992, where he was an athlete as well as the president of the Library Club. After that, he joined the U.S. Air Force and served there from 1993 to 1997. He was married in 1992, but separated from his first wife in 1994 and later divorced. According to the reports of Dothan Eagle at the time, McCraney's ex-wife filed a complaint with the Air Force in 1994 stating that McCraney had assaulted her. McCraney remarried in 2001 and had children with a second wife. Other than failing to pay child support in 1998, McCraney had no criminal record in the past 20 years or so. He'd been working as a trucker all of his life and had worked for several trucking companies in Alabama over the years. In recent years, he co-founded a church and worked as a bishop there. At the time of the killings, he was around 26 and living on Lisenby Drive in Ozark, about 1 mile away from where the bodies of J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hallett were found in 1999. 2 decades after the Splain High School seniors, J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hallett were found. Cole McCraney was arrested after a traffic stop in Daleville, Alabama on March 19, 2019. In the interview with police, after he was taken into custody, McCraney said he did not know the girls. Investigators did not clarify any motive for the murder. The news of his arrest was a great shock to the Ozark community and the Ozark police chief, Marlins Walker, who went to school with McCraney, as it seemed that the many twisted strands in this Athlon case were finally all being tied together. There was to be one more revelation. The now 53-year-old Rena Crum, who previously accused the Ozark Police Department of covering up the murder, recanted her allegations as she testified during a hearing for McCraney in August 2022. McCraney, now 49, is facing 5 counts of capital murder charges for the shooting deaths of J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hallett. He now sits behind bars in Dale County Jail as of the time of his arrest. His bond has been denied pending his trial on April 17, 2023. The news of finally apprehending the killer was a relief to the families of both girls. However, reliving all the haunting memories through the trial and hearings is another painful journey still to come. We can only hope that the families can heal through a sense of peace that their daughters are finally getting justice more than 2 decades later. Do you believe McCraney is responsible for the murders? So what was the motive? Do you find any validity in the police cover-up claims? Let us know what your thoughts are in the comments section below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more gripping stories like this. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.